Hi, my name is hanspetermeyer, and I'm interviewing Mark Holland. Mark is one of the principals with HBLanarc, and they're doing the Comox Valley Sustainability Strategy this year. Mark, I just came back, well, we both just came back recently from Resilient Cities Conference in Vancouver. It was a pretty amazing gathering of people really serious about doing sustainability stuff in big cities, small cities, towns, villages, whatever. You gave an amazing cap to that conference. You gathered together a lot of thoughts there, and you were the final presenter, and you gave basically the Resilient Cities Manifesto. The response that I've heard around that from people I respect is it's been really inspired by it. What interests me is how the kind of distance between that kind of inspirational, really motivating discussion about sustainability and our need to do a lot of things differently, and the kind of realities of doing, for instance, a sustainability strategy in a place like the Comox Valley, which, in my experience, has been a very challenging place to get things moving on that area, at least in terms of all the different parts of the community moving in the same direction. So I want to start off our conversation about what's happening in the Comox Valley, just with some of your thoughts about that. That, you know, like, on the one hand, you're working on a policy level, which is very mundane, and I think has got some people feeling really frustrated. And on the other hand, you are able to rise to a very inspirational kind of place with this stuff. So, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Hans. It's the manifesto that I gave a few weeks ago was the result of me soaking in 2.5 days of the thoughts of essentially a group of leaders in progressive and sustainable cities and development from all over North America, who'd been gathered there by Gene Miller, by the host, the organizer of it, and we shared our experiences and ideas for 2.5 days through a whole sequence of processes. And Gene asked me at the end to compile, I guess, essentially a manifesto that articulated the collective experience and insights of that whole event, of all of these people who felt this way and were doing these things. So that's where that came from. Because I sat down and I wrote it, and it was my notes and my understanding of things. Yes, I'm credited with the authorship of it. It was a little bigger than me, though. It was essentially attempting to bring together and weave together the insights of this very amazing collection of leaders. You know, John Knott, Paul Hawken, groups like this that were all essentially comparing notes and explaining to each other what they were doing. Underpinning the Resilient Cities Conference is the experience of the Gaining Ground conferences for the last several years, which is, again, leaders talking to leaders. And what we've all discovered in the last few years is how important essentially our spiritual frame of mind, I'm not sure what other word to use, it's kind of a spiritual feeling behind it, is to what we're all doing. It's really it's the fuel and the motivator and the vision and the drive behind why we all do what we do.
So how does that manifest in a place, and then the work that you're doing in the Comox Valley?
So when you move into a valley like the Comox Valley with 4 different governments, a very long history of many different people, a lot of new people moving into it, and this really interesting mix of essentially contemporary urban attitudes and assumptions, along with this rich history of the north and central Vancouver Island, which is a lot of resource and agriculture, and there's a military base there. It's a very diverse and rich history. When all of these begin to gather here at the beginning of the 21st century, it's a very interesting kind of set of discussions that begins to occur. And in the process of sustainability planning, the importance of the powerful vision is absolutely critical. It's fundamental to moving towards sustainability. What we've seen in the last 20 years since sustainability kind of really showed up as a powerful challenge to us all is sort of a couple of different paths that have occurred. One is a group of thought, which is very pure in its essence, and it spends its time articulating where we need to be.
That's kind of like your manifesto then, would be
like the manifesto, exactly.
Okay.
The manifesto would fall into something like that, where it's attempting to give articulation to where we need to be. And then there's another stream of work that has been evolving in various forms, which is, well, what do we need to do now? And in the Comox Valley, the way we have structured that discussion and the way people have responded to it has been to establish a discussion about the targets for performance. What do we want to be, how do we want this valley to perform in 2050? So we've articulated this sort of, put a stake in the ground out, nearly half a century, and said, we need to be sustainable by then, or very, very close to it, as best as we can tell today. Now, we'll be wiser tomorrow than we are today, but let's use the wisdom we have today to get as close to it as we can. And let's articulate what we need to do. So that's what those sort of the 2050 dimension of the discussion in Comox Valley has been. Coming back then to what we can do today, to the other stream of thought, the very pragmatic observation that you can't run a marathon without training for it. You can't climb a stairwell in one step. You have to take a whole series of steps. You can't complete your journey in one moment. Is that we need to start with what we can do today. And what we're working with today in the Comox Valley and in any community in North America is a set of governments, not as in the people, but in the government structure and jurisdictions and mandates. A set of business assumptions, market rules, all kinds of lifestyles that are all predicated on the assumption of the 20th century. And the 21st century is a new world, and so at the end of it we will have rebuilt things in its image, but we're right now at that really tough part between moving from a century where energy was cheap, we had no idea we were destroying our planet, we set all kinds of economic and governance models to do certain things, and now we're discovering that we have to actually change quite a bit of that. So what the discussion of the Comox Valley is about is then you come back to today and you start looking for targets for what we want to achieve and how we want to change for the next 5 to 10 years. And so the way we framed it is 2050 is kind of like a manifesto on what we need to do. 2015 is like what we can do. And so then the challenge is to lay out a process that has multiple decades in it, but to be able to move from what we can do to what we need to do. And that's what the strategy for the Comox Valley, that's the architecture of all of the discussions that have occurred around that process.
Well, thanks for explaining that. I think we're going to be here, we're going to have several parts to this conversation. And in fact, we're going to break off now, and I'll talk to Mark a little bit later on about some of the, what he's excited about with the current strategy, the draft strategy, the kind of obstacles or challenges that he sees to implementing it, and then also some of his views on what we can be doing in the Comox Valley to meet, our 2015 targets, but also the larger 2050 vision. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.